Your Honor, may I clarify this point before we proceed? Mrs. Whitmore, I'll ask you one more time. Where were you on the night of August 15th?
The courtroom in downtown Chicago fell silent as Judge Patricia Hollingsworth leaned forward, her gray eyes fixed on the trembling woman in the witness stand. The question hung in the air like a blade about to fall. Mrs. Whitmore, I'll ask you one more time. Where were you on the night of August 15th? Diane Whitmore's hands shook as she gripped the edge of the witness box. Her navy dress, carefully chosen to appear respectful and demure, was now damp with perspiration at the collar. Behind her, seated at the plaintiff's table, her husband's attorney, a man named Preston Caldwell, who commanded $500 an hour, suddenly went rigid. I was at home, Diane whispered, her voice barely audible. The judge's expression didn't change. Speak up, please. The court reporter needs to hear you. I was at home, Diane repeated, louder this time, but her eyes darted to her husband. Maxwell Whitmore sat there in his $1,000 suit, jaw clenched, the veins in his neck visible even from across the room. His stare could have burned holes through steel. Judge Hollingsworth reached for a manila folder on her bench. She opened it slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a single photograph. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to show you Exhibit 47. Do you recognize this location? The bailiff walked the photograph to Diane. The moment her eyes landed on it, all the color drained from her face. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For the record, the judge continued, this is a security camera image from the Rosewood Hotel on Michigan Avenue. The timestamp reads 9:47 p.m. on August 15th. Would you like to revise your answer about where you were that evening? Preston Caldwell shot to his feet. Your Honor, I object. On what grounds? The judge interrupted, her tone sharp. Caldwell opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at his client, then at Diane, then back at the judge. For the first time in 23 years of his career, he had no response. The courtroom watched as he gathered his leather briefcase, his hands moving mechanically, and without another word, he walked toward the exit. His footsteps echoed through the chamber. The heavy oak door closed behind him with a finality that made several spectators gasp. He never came back. What happened in that Chicago courtroom wasn't just the collapse of a legal strategy. It was the unraveling of a lie so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that when it fell apart, it took everything with it. And Diane Whitmore, the woman everyone assumed was just another scorned wife in a bitter divorce, was about to reveal a truth that would shock not just her husband, not just the courtroom, but the entire city. Before we dive deeper into what Diane said next and why that single photograph changed everything, I need to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city and state in the comments below. And if you believe that the truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how deeply it's buried, hit that subscribe button right now. Stories like this, stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary courage, deserve to be told. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk about who Diane Whitmore really was and how she ended up in that witness stand fighting for her life. Diane had been married to Maxwell Whitmore for 11 years. They met at a charity gala in Oak Park, one of those glittering events where Chicago's elite gathered to write checks and feel good about themselves. She was 26, working as a nurse at Rush University Medical Center, filling in as a server that night to earn extra money. He was 34, already a partner at Whitmore & Associates, a commercial real estate firm his father had founded. Maxwell was charming that night. He made her laugh, he asked about her work, seemed genuinely interested in her stories from the ICU. When he asked for her number, she hesitated. Men like him didn't date women like her. But he persisted, and 3 months later, they were engaged. The first 2 years were good. Maxwell was attentive, generous. He paid off her student loans, encouraged her to quit nursing and focus on starting a family. They bought a house in Winnetka, a sprawling 4-bedroom colonial with a view of Lake Michigan. Diane redecorated every room, planted a garden, learned to make elaborate dinner parties for Maxwell's business associates. But somewhere around year 3, things shifted. Maxwell started working later. He became irritable, critical. He'd comment on Diane's weight, her clothes, the way she laughed. Small things at first, easy to dismiss as stress, but they accumulated like stones in a jar until the jar was too heavy to carry. By year 5, Diane barely recognized her life. She had no job, few friends, and a husband who treated her like an employee she couldn't fire. She thought about leaving, but Maxwell controlled everything. The bank accounts, the house, even her car was in his name. And when she finally worked up the courage to mention divorce, he laughed. "You'll get nothing," he told her over breakfast one Saturday morning, not even looking up from his newspaper. "I've made sure of that. Every asset is protected, every dollar accounted for. You walk out that door, you walk out with the clothes on your back." Diane believed him. She had no reason not to. Maxwell was a lawyer after all. He knew how these things worked. But what Maxwell didn't know was that his wife was smarter than he gave her credit for. It started small. Diane began keeping records, not obvious ones, nothing Maxwell would notice. She photographed documents when he left them on his desk. She made copies of credit card statements that came in the mail. She recorded conversations on her phone, tucked in her pocket during arguments. For 6 months, she collected evidence like a detective building a case. And what she found was far worse than a controlling husband or a failed marriage. What she found was a criminal. Maxwell Whitmore had been systematically frauding his clients for at least 4 years, possibly longer. He would inflate property appraisals, pocket the difference. He'd create shell companies to hide assets, then charge his clients fees for consulting services that never existed. He even forged signatures on contracts, all while maintaining his reputation as one of Chicago's most respected real estate attorneys. The scale of it was staggering. Diane estimated he'd stolen somewhere between $3 and $7 million, and she had proof. When Diane finally filed for divorce, Maxwell was blindsided. He'd grown so comfortable in his control, so confident in his superiority, that he never saw it coming. He hired Preston Caldwell immediately, the best divorce attorney money could buy. Caldwell was known for destroying opposing parties, for leaving them with nothing but debt and regret. The strategy was simple: paint Diane as an unstable, ungrateful woman who contributed nothing to the marriage and deserved nothing from it. They'd claim she had a spending problem, that she'd been unfaithful, that she'd been planning this divorce for years to steal Maxwell's hard-earned money. It should have worked. Caldwell had used this playbook dozens of times. But he hadn't counted on one thing: Diane Whitmore wasn't playing by the usual rules. The divorce proceedings began in early July. The first few hearings were procedural, tedious. Maxwell sat confidently beside Caldwell, occasionally smirking when Diane's attorney, a young woman named Rebecca Ortiz, fresh out of Northwestern law, stumbled over an objection. But Rebecca wasn't stumbling. She was stalling. She was waiting. By the 4th hearing, Judge Hollingsworth was clearly frustrated. "Ms. Ortiz, you've requested 3 continuances. Either present more evidence or concede the financial disclosures." Rebecca stood. "Your Honor, I apologize for the delays, but I believe the court will find the wait worthwhile. I'd like to call Diane Whitmore to the stand." That's when everything changed. Diane walked to the witness box with her head high. She wore no jewelry except her wedding ring, which she still hadn't removed. Her hands were steady as she was sworn in. Rebecca began with simple questions. How long had she been married? What was her role in the household? Did she have access to the couple's finances? Then Rebecca asked, "Mrs. Whitmore, in your time as Maxwell's wife, did you ever have concerns about his business practices?" Preston Caldwell objected immediately. "Relevance, Your Honor. This is a divorce proceeding, not a criminal trial." "I'll allow it, but make your point quickly, Ms. Ortiz." Rebecca nodded. "Mrs. Whitmore, please answer the question." Diane took a breath. "Yes, I had concerns." "What kind of concerns?" "I believed my husband was stealing from his clients." The courtroom erupted. Maxwell's face turned crimson. Caldwell was on his feet, shouting objections. But Judge Hollingsworth banged her gavel once, sharp and commanding. "Order. Mr. Caldwell, sit down. Mrs. Whitmore, that's a serious accusation. Do you have any evidence to support it?" "Yes, Your Honor," Diane said quietly. "I have extensive evidence." Rebecca approached the bench with a leather portfolio. Inside were copies of everything Diane had collected, bank statements showing irregular transfers, emails discussing falsified appraisals, photographs of documents Maxwell thought he'd destroyed. Judge Hollingsworth examined the documents in silence. Minutes passed. The only sound was the rustling of paper and the tick of the courtroom clock. Finally, the judge looked up. Her expression was unreadable. "Mr. Caldwell, I suggest you and your client take a recess to review this material." But Caldwell didn't move. He stared at the documents, his face pale. He knew what they meant. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. This was fraud, wire fraud, possibly racketeering. His client wasn't just going to lose the divorce. His client was going to prison. And if Caldwell continued representing him, if he helped Maxwell hide these assets or coached him through testimony, he'd be disbarred at minimum, possibly charged as an accessory. When court resumed after a 20-minute recess, Caldwell looked like a man who'd aged 10 years. He stood stiffly, his usual swagger completely gone. "Your Honor," he said, his voice hoarse, "I need to request a continuance to consult with my client about these new allegations." "Denied," Judge Hollingsworth said flatly. "We're proceeding. Mrs. Whitmore, please retake the stand." That's when the judge asked the question about August 15th, because buried in all those documents Diane had collected was something else, something that explained why she'd been so careful, so methodical, something that explained why she'd waited 6 months to file for divorce. On August 15th, Maxwell had told Diane he was working late, a big deal closing, he said, "Don't wait up." But Diane had her doubts, so she followed him. She'd parked down the street from his office and waited. At 9:30, Maxwell emerged, but he didn't head home. He drove to the Rosewood Hotel on Michigan Avenue. Diane watched from her car as he entered the lobby. She waited 15 minutes, then followed. The hotel had a bar, upscale and dimly lit. She found a seat in the corner, partially hidden by a decorative pillar, and ordered a glass of wine she didn't drink. Maxwell was at a table near the window. He wasn't alone. Sitting across from him was a man Diane recognized from one of Maxwell's business dinners, Gordon Finch, owner of Finch Properties, one of Maxwell's biggest clients. They talked for over an hour. Diane couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see Maxwell's body language. He was nervous, defensive. At one point, he pulled out his phone and showed Gordon something on the screen. Gordon's face went from confused to angry in seconds. The argument escalated. Gordon stood, threw cash on the table, and walked out. Maxwell sat there alone for a long time, his head in his hands. Diane left before he did, but she'd seen enough. The next morning, she checked the news. Gordon Finch had been found dead in his home in Evanston. Initial reports called it a heart attack, but Diane knew better. She knew that whatever Maxwell had shown Gordon that night, whatever they'd argued about, had triggered something fatal. Whether it was the stress, the betrayal, the realization that he'd been defrauded, it didn't matter. Gordon Finch died because of Maxwell Whitmore, and Diane had proof they'd met that night. When Judge Hollingsworth showed Diane the security camera photo from the Rosewood Hotel, she wasn't just asking about an affair, she was asking about a cover-up. "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge said, her voice cutting through the silent courtroom, "did you witness a meeting between your husband and Gordon Finch on the night of August 15th? Diane's voice was steady now. The fear had burned away, leaving only resolve. "Yes, Your Honor, I did." "And why didn't you come forward sooner?" "Because I was afraid," Diane said simply. "My husband is a powerful man. He has connections, resources. I didn't think anyone would believe me. So I waited. I collected evidence. I built a case. And when I filed for divorce, I knew it would all come out." Maxwell was on his feet now, shouting, "She's lying! This is extortion! She's trying to—" "Mr. Whitmore, sit down," Judge Hollingsworth commanded. "One more outburst and you'll be removed from this courtroom." But Maxwell didn't sit. He turned to Preston Caldwell, desperation in his eyes. "Do something! Object! This is—" Caldwell stood slowly. He looked at Maxwell, then at the judge, then at Diane, and in that moment he made a choice that would define the rest of his career. He picked up his briefcase. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I can no longer represent Mr. Whitmore in this matter. I'm withdrawing as counsel, effective immediately." "On what grounds?" "Ethical conflict," he replied. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Everyone in that courtroom understood. He'd just learned his client was likely a criminal, and if he continued defending him, he'd become complicit. Before we continue with what happened next, because this story is about to take another turn you won't see coming, I need you to do something. If you're watching this and you're as hooked as I think you are, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me what you think Maxwell did wrong. Was it the fraud, the lies, or something darker? And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This channel is dedicated to real stories about real people facing impossible situations. Stories that keep you up at night wondering what you'd do in their place. Subscribe now and let's keep uncovering these truths together.
Now, back to that Chicago courtroom where everything was about to explode. Preston Caldwell's footsteps echoed through the chamber as he walked toward the exit. Every eye followed him. The heavy door closed with a thud that seemed to seal Maxwell's fate. Maxwell stood alone now, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You can't do this," he shouted at the closed door. "I'm paying you." Judge Hollingsworth's gavel came down hard. "Mr. Whitmore, control yourself or I'll have you removed. Do you understand?" Maxwell slowly sank back into his chair. His hands were shaking. For the first time in his life, he had no control, no leverage, no escape. "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge continued, "I'm going to ask you to continue your testimony, but first I want to make something clear. If what you're alleging is true, this matter extends far beyond a divorce proceeding. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Your Honor," Diane said. "And you're willing to provide all your evidence to the appropriate authorities?" "Yes, Your Honor, I've already contacted the FBI." Another wave of shock rippled through the courtroom. Maxwell's head snapped up. "What?" Diane finally looked directly at her husband. 2 weeks ago, I met with Special Agent Philip Cordova from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I gave him everything. Copies of all the documents, recordings of conversations, transaction records. They've been investigating you for 10 days. Maxwell's face went from red to white in seconds. You did what?" "I did what you forced me to do," Diane said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You made me feel small, stupid, worthless. You controlled every aspect of my life, and you thought I was too weak to fight back, but you were wrong." She stood up in the witness box, even though no one had dismissed her. Judge Hollingsworth didn't stop her. "I watched you steal from people who trusted you. I watched you lie to clients who thought you were helping them. I watched you destroy Gordon Finch, a good man who did nothing wrong except believe in you. And when he confronted you, when he realized what you'd done, the stress killed him. You killed him, Maxwell. Maybe not with your hands, but with your greed and your lies." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her hands frozen over the keys. "You thought I was nothing," Diane said, tears streaming down her face now, but her voice never wavering. "You thought you could control me forever, but I'm standing here today to tell you that you're wrong. I'm not nothing. I'm the person who's going to make sure you face justice." Maxwell lunged forward, but the bailiff was already moving. 2 officers restrained him as he shouted incoherently, his carefully crafted image shattering like glass. Judge Hollingsworth stood. "This hearing is adjourned. Mr. Whitmore, you are to remain in this jurisdiction pending investigation by federal authorities. Your passport is hereby surrendered. Officers, please escort Mr. Whitmore out of my courtroom." As Maxwell was led away, still shouting, still struggling, Diane sat back down in the witness box. Her whole body was trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. Rebecca Ortiz rushed to her side, putting a supportive hand on her shoulder. "You did it," Rebecca whispered. "You actually did it." Diane nodded, unable to speak. She'd done it. After years of living in fear, after months of secret preparation, after a marriage that had nearly destroyed her, she'd done it. But the story doesn't end there, because what happened in the weeks that followed revealed layers to this case that no one, not even Diane, had fully anticipated. The FBI's investigation moved quickly once they had Diane's evidence. Within 3 days, they'd executed search warrants on Maxwell's office, his home, and his safety deposit boxes. What they found confirmed everything Diane had documented, but it also revealed something worse. Maxwell wasn't working alone. The fraud scheme involved at least 6 other individuals, 2 junior partners at his firm, an accountant and real estate appraiser, and 2 bank officers who'd helped facilitate the fraudulent transactions. Together, they'd created an intricate web of shell companies, fake appraisals, and forged documents that had been operating for nearly 8 years. The total amount stolen? $12.4 million. Gordon Finch wasn't their only victim, though his death brought the most attention. There were dozens of others, small business owners who'd trusted Maxwell to handle commercial real estate deals, retirees who'd invested their savings based on his advice, even a non-profit organization that had been defrauded for nearly $500,000 intended for a community center in Englewood. Each victim had a story. Each one had trusted Maxwell because of his reputation, his charm, his apparent success, and each one had been betrayed. The Chicago Tribune ran the story on the front page, "Prominent attorney charged in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme." The article included a photo of Maxwell in handcuffs being led from the federal courthouse. His face was haggard, his expensive suit rumpled. He looked nothing like the confident man who once commanded every room he entered. But the article also included a photo of Diane. She stood on the courthouse steps beside Rebecca Ortiz, her head high, her expression calm. The caption read, "Wife's evidence breaks the case." Overnight, Diane became a reluctant hero. News outlets requested interviews. Lawyers called offering to represent her pro bono in the divorce. Victims of Maxwell's scheme reached out, thanking her for her courage. But Diane didn't want to be a hero. She wanted her life back. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Judge Hollingsworth awarded Diane the house in Winnetka, full ownership of both vehicles, and 60% of the marital assets that weren't seized by federal authorities. She ordered Maxwell to pay spousal support, though everyone knew he'd be in prison long before those payments came due. Maxwell's trial began in February. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They had documents, recordings, testimony from co-conspirators who'd agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. But the most damaging testimony came from Diane herself. She spent 2 days on the witness stand, walking the jury through years of her husband's criminal activity. She explained how she'd discovered the fraud, how she'd documented everything, how she'd finally found the courage to act. She spoke about Gordon Finch, about the night at the Rosewood Hotel, about her belief that Maxwell's actions had caused his death. The defense tried to discredit her. They called her a bitter ex-wife, motivated by greed and revenge. They suggested she'd fabricated evidence to frame Maxwell. They even implied she might have been complicit in the fraud herself. But the jury didn't buy it. After 6 weeks of testimony and 4 days of deliberation, they returned with their verdict. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud. Maxwell Whitmore was sentenced to 17 years in federal prison. When the sentence was read, Diane was sitting in the back of the courtroom. She didn't cheer, she didn't cry, she simply stood up and walked out, ready to start the next chapter of her life. But there's one more part to this story, one more piece that explains why Diane's courage mattered so much. 6 months after Maxwell's sentencing, Diane received a letter. It was from a woman named Olivia Patterson, someone she'd never met. Olivia lived in Springfield, Illinois, nearly 200 miles south of Chicago. In the letter, Olivia explained that she'd been in an abusive marriage for 9 years. Her husband controlled all the money, isolated her from friends and family, and frequently told her she'd be nothing without him. She'd thought about leaving countless times, but she was terrified. She had no job, no resources, no proof of the abuse that would hold up in court. Then she saw Diane's story on the news. "I watched you testify," Olivia wrote. "I watched you stand up to a man who tried to destroy you, and I realized something. If you could do it, maybe I could too. Your courage gave me courage." Olivia went on to explain that she'd started documenting everything, just like Diane had. She took photos, made recordings, kept detailed notes. She opened a secret bank account and began saving small amounts of money. She contacted a domestic violence organization and started working with an advocate. 3 months after seeing Diane's story, Olivia filed for divorce. 2 weeks later, she moved into a shelter with her 2 young children. "It was terrifying," she wrote, "and some days she wasn't sure she'd make it. But every time she wanted to give up, she thought about Diane standing in that witness box, refusing to back down." "You saved my life," Olivia's letter concluded. "You probably don't even know how many women you've helped by speaking up, but I want you to know that I'm one of them. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to fight back. Thank you for proving that the truth matters." Diane kept that letter. She framed it and hung it in her home office where she could see it every day. Because that's the real point of this story. It's not just about one woman taking down a corrupt husband. It's about what happens when someone finds the courage to stand up, to speak out, to refuse to accept the lies and the abuse and the injustice. Diane Whitmore could have stayed silent. She could have accepted the divorce on Maxwell's terms, walked away with nothing, and disappeared into obscurity. Many people in her position would have. The fight was risky, exhausting, and terrifying. But she didn't stay silent. She fought back, and in doing so, she didn't just save herself, she saved dozens of other victims from Maxwell's fraud, and she inspired countless others to find their own courage. Today, Diane works as an advocate for domestic abuse survivors. She speaks at conferences, trains legal professionals on recognizing financial abuse, and mentors women who are trying to escape controlling relationships. She took the worst experience of her life and transformed it into something meaningful. The house in Winnetka is gone. She sold it and moved to a smaller place in Oak Park, the neighborhood where she first met Maxwell all those years ago. But this time, she's not serving at a charity gala. She's not trying to impress anyone. She's simply living her life on her own terms. As for Maxwell, he's serving his sentence at a federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. He'll be eligible for parole in 2035 when he's 68 years old. His law license was revoked. His assets were liquidated to provide restitution to his victims. The firm that bore his name rebranded and severed all ties.
Preston Caldwell, a lawyer who walked out of that courtroom, never spoke publicly about the case, but according to people who know him, that day changed something in him. He became more selective for his clients, more willing to turn down cases that didn't sit right with his conscience. Some say he lost money because of it. Others say he found something more valuable, his integrity. And Judge Patricia Hollingsworth, she retired 2 years later, after 30 years on the bench. In her farewell address, she spoke about the Whitmore case, though she never mentioned names. In my decades as a judge, I've seen thousands of cases. Most of them blend together after a while, but every so often you see something that reminds you why we have a justice system. You see someone who refuses to be silenced, who stands up for what's right even when the cost is enormous. Those are the cases that stay with you. Those are the people who restore your faith in the law.
So what's the lesson here? What can we take away from Diane Whitmore's story? Maybe it's this: the truth is powerful. Lies can be elaborate, well-funded, and backed by people with impressive titles and expensive suits. But the truth has a weight to it that eventually breaks through all the deception. Or maybe it's this: courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. Diane was terrified every step of the way. She was afraid Maxwell would destroy her, afraid no one would believe her, afraid she'd lose everything. But she acted anyway, because sometimes doing the right thing requires us to move forward despite our fear, not because of its absence. Or maybe the lesson is simpler. Never underestimate someone just because they seem powerless. Maxwell looked at Diane and saw a woman he'd broken, someone too weak to fight back. He couldn't have been more wrong. The people we dismiss, the people we underestimate, they're often the ones with the most strength because they've had to develop it just to survive. Whatever lesson you take from this story, I hope it stays with you. I hope the next time you see someone struggling, someone who seems defeated, you remember Diane Whitmore. Remember that she walked into that Chicago courtroom alone, faced down her abuser and his expensive lawyer, and won. Because if she could do it with no money and no power and no one on her side except one young attorney who believed in her, then maybe we all can find that courage when we need it most. The truth has a way of surfacing. Sometimes it takes months, sometimes it takes years, but eventually the lies crumble, the facades fall away, and what's left is the simple, undeniable reality of what happened. And when that moment comes, when the judge asks that one question that cracks everything open, you have a choice. You can tell the truth or you can run. Preston Caldwell ran. He walked out of that courtroom and never came back. But Diane Whitmore stayed. She answered the question, she told the truth, and she changed everything. That's the power of one person who refuses to be silenced. That's the power of standing up, speaking out, and believing that justice still matters. Judge Patricia Hollingsworth asked Diane one question, and in answering it, Diane didn't just save herself. She saved everyone Maxwell had hurt and everyone he would have hurt in the future. One question, one answer, one woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. That's all it took to bring down an empire built on lies. And that's a story worth remembering. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about courage and truth and justice, leave a comment below. Tell me what part hit you hardest. Tell me if you've ever had to stand up to someone more powerful than you. Tell me if you know someone like Diane who needs to hear that they're not alone. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because stories like this don't just entertain us, they remind us of what's possible when ordinary people do extraordinary things. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for believing that the truth still matters. Never forget, sometimes the most powerful weapon you have is simply refusing to lie, and sometimes that's enough to change everything.